Have you ever maybe looked out over a really big lake or the ocean when it just stretches out forever and felt this little knot of unease?
Hmm.
Not really being scared of the water itself, but just something about how huge it is that feels a bit unsettling.
That exact feeling, yeah. That's what we're diving into today. This whole deep dive is about thalassophobia,
Thalassophobia.
which is, well, it's this persistent, pretty intense fear specifically of deep bodies of water. Oceans, seas, even those massive lakes you mentioned.
Okay, right. Let's nail that down immediately because I think that's super important. We're not just talking about being afraid of water in general, like aquaphobia.
No, absolutely not. That's a key distinction.
Thalassophobia is more targeted, isn't it? It's about something in the water or, or,
Yeah.
or the water itself.
Well, it's less about water in any form like you'd see with aquaphobia, fear of pools, baths, whatever. Thalassophobia really zones in on the depth, the scale, the vastness.
No.
So someone might be fine in a swimming pool, totally comfortable, but then face the open ocean. That triggers overwhelming anxiety. It's that sense of the deep, the endlessness.
Gotcha. So it's not only being in deep water that could trigger it. Are there other things that set off that thalassophobic feeling?
Good question. Yeah, it's broader. For some people, it's just being surrounded by that depth, knowing there's this huge volume of water underneath you.
Right.
Or just the horizon, the sea seeming infinite. Even like waves can do it for some. And, well, obviously the thought of what might be living down there, unseen.
Pictures.
Definitely. And also, like you hinted at earlier, just being really far from land. That feeling of being completely adrift.
Okay, so for our exploration today,
Yeah.
our mission maybe, we want to really unpack what thalassophobia is.
Yeah, get to the core of it.
And look at maybe why it starts, how it shows up in people, and importantly, what can actually be done about it.
Sounds like a plan. So let's start with the basics maybe, defining it a bit more clearly.
Right. The word itself, thalassophobia, it's got interesting roots, doesn't it? Tells you something straight away.
It really does. Comes straight from ancient Greek. You've got thalassa, meaning sea, and phobos, which means fear.
Fear of the sea. Simple enough.
Pretty literal, yeah. Now, clinically speaking, like how psychologists see it, it's not just a passing worry.
Nah.
For it to be diagnosed as thalassophobia, the fear has to be persistent. It needs to hang around for more than 6 months, typically.
Okay, that makes sense. It's not just that occasional, whoa, that's deep feeling we might all get.
Exactly. It's more enduring, more impactful than that.
And just to circle back, because it's important this isn't the same as aquaphobia, the general water fear. Someone with thalassophobia might be fine with, say, taking a shower.
Totally fine. The key thing, the real crux of thalassophobia, is the anxiety tied specifically to the deepness, the vastness, the scale of large bodies of water.
The unknown in those depths.
Precisely. The unknown, and maybe that feeling of being, well, tiny and insignificant against something so immense.
Okay, so we've got a better handle on what it is. Let's talk about why. Where does a fear like this even come from? Our sources suggested a few angles, starting way back maybe. Evolution.
Yeah, it's fascinating to think about. Could a fear of deep water be, like, baked into us somehow? An evolutionary echo. The anti-anxiety workbook we looked at puts it pretty well. It basically says, from a survival perspective, it just made sense for early humans to be wary of deep water.
Because of the risks, obviously. Drowning, predators you can't see.
Exactly. So the idea is maybe our brains got sort of programmed to fear certain things more easily, things that were real threats back then. Deep water, heights, snakes, maybe more readily than, say, flowers.
Right. That makes intuitive sense.
And it ties into this broader concept, too, the fear of the unknown. One study mentioned it as a key survival mechanism. Think about it. Our ancestors relied on land. Deep water was unpredictable, dangerous territory. What's lurking down there? Better safe than sorry. That fear was actually adaptive.
So that caution, that wariness of the deep, could maybe have been passed down generation to generation.
That's the theory, yeah. That ingrained vigilance, that tendency to fear what you can't see in the depths, might have become embedded because it helped us survive.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
But evolution's probably not the only factor. Our sources also talked a lot about stories, culture, popular media. That seems huge.
Oh, absolutely massive. Think about how the sea is portrayed throughout history. In myths, religions, it's often this place of immense power, disaster, even like divine punishment.
Like Noah's Ark.
Exactly. That's a classic, powerful example. The flood narrative.
And it's not just religious stories, right? literature, too.
Definitely. Shakespeare's The Tempest kicks off with a violent shipwreck, framing the sea as this chaotic, mysterious, maybe even evil force.
Uh-huh.
And the authors of Beasts of the Deep, Harrington and Hackett, they argue pretty strongly that these kinds of narratives really fuel our collective fear of the oceans.
And those gothic horror stories, supernatural tales, they love using the sea for spooky stuff.
They really do. It's been a consistent trope for centuries, the sea, as this source of eerie, unsettling, frightening imagery that sinks in culturally, and then boom, modern pop culture takes over.
Okay, I know where this is going. Jaws.
You got it. The 1975 movie, our sources pinpointed Jaws as a possible driver of what they called a social contagion of thalassophobia.
Hard to argue with that one. That film terrified a generation about going into the ocean.
It absolutely tapped into those primal fears, didn't it? Gave the unknown a very big, toothy face. But it's not just fiction.
No.
Mainstream media reports, too. News about shark attacks, even if they're rare, or other dangerous encounters. That sticks with people. It reinforces the fear.
And real disasters that get turned into movies.
Yeah.
Like the Titanic. That must feed into the fear of drowning, the sea's power.
Without a doubt, these cultural touchstones, old myths, modern blockbusters, real tragedies amplified, they all weave this narrative around deep water that can definitely magnify or even trigger thalassophobia.
Okay, so we've got evolution, we've got culture. What about just personal stuff, bad experiences?
Yeah, that's another critical piece. A direct, negative, maybe traumatic experience with water is a really significant potential trigger.
Like almost drowning.
Exactly, or being pulled out by a current, getting really scared while swimming. Those events can leave a serious psychological mark and definitely contribute to developing this phobia.
And it's not just things happening to you, is it? I think our sources mentioned seeing fear in others, like parents.
Yes, absolutely. Observational learning. Especially as kids, we learn a lot about what's dangerous by watching how adults react.
Ah, okay.
So if you grow up with a parent who's clearly terrified of deep water, you might internalize that fear yourself. It becomes learned behavior.
And then genetics. Is that a factor too? Could you be predisposed?
Well, research does suggest there might be a genetic component. Your biology could make you more susceptible.
So.
It might be linked to family history, having relatives with thalassophobia or other anxiety disorders, or maybe just broader inherited traits like being more prone to negativity or being highly sensitive or just generally anxious. Even just hearing really vivid, scary stories about water accidents could be enough to plant that seed of fear for some people.
Wow. So it sounds like it's rarely just one thing. It's more like a mix, maybe? Evolution, culture, personal stuff, maybe genetics, all potentially playing a part.
That seems like a really good way to summarize it. It's often an interplay. And then beyond those factors, there are also some interesting psychological theories trying to explain it.
Okay, let's get into those. What did the psych theories say about why we fear the deep?
Well, one interesting idea connects to how much we rely on sight. As land animals, vision is key for us, right? Finding food, spotting danger.
Sure.
But in the deep sea, vision becomes less useful. Suddenly you're in this environment where, as one source put it, you have to rely on senses that you don't normally rely upon.
Like hearing or just feeling.
Exactly. And that shift, losing your primary sense in a place that feels vast and potentially dangerous, that can trigger a fear of the dark, the deep, the unknown.
That makes a lot of sense. It's disorienting. What about more symbolic ideas?
Right. This brings in thinkers like Carl Jung. He talked about archetypes in the collective unconscious, these universal symbols. Jung saw water as a really powerful archetype, often symbolizing the unconscious mind itself, potentially reflecting our deepest, darkest thoughts, desires, the primal stuff.
So the huge unknown ocean could be like a mirror to our own inner depths.
That's the idea, yeah. And building on that, Harrington, looking through a Freudian lens, suggests maybe our conscious self, our ego, isn't fully aware of everything going on inside us, repressed thoughts, hidden desires.
Okay.
And the theory goes, these hidden parts of us get sort of projected onto the water, mirrored back at us, and that creates unease, even dread.
Whoa, that's deep.
Yeah.
Pun intended, I guess. The ocean reflecting our own unfamiliar inner world.
It's a profound concept. And Harrington also suggests our limited understanding of the ocean. It's so vast, so uncharted feeds the fear. What could be down there? Sea monsters, right?
Like the classic fear.
Exactly. So ultimately, comparing our finite minds to this infinite ocean might just highlight how unfamiliar even parts of our own identity can feel, contributing to the phobia.
Okay. Wow. Lots of potential roots. So how does this actually look in someone experiencing it? What are the triggers? the symptoms?
Well, the triggers can really vary. For many, it's direct contact being near the ocean, a deep lake, on a boat, swimming, scuba diving, even submarines.
Or just thinking about it.
Yeah, even just thinking about it or seeing pictures, watching movies with deep water scenes, that can be enough.
And you mentioned earlier, sometimes it's not about monsters,
Yeah.
but just the emptiness.
Exactly. For some, it's the sheer scale, the void, the endlessness that's deeply disturbing. Not necessarily what's in it, but the vast nothingness itself.
Hmm.
And it's really important to stress these triggers hit people differently. What's mild unease for one person can be a full-blown panic attack for another.
Right. And the symptoms themselves, emotionally, physically. What does someone go through?
Emotionally, it can be pretty tough. Things like constant worrying, maybe trouble sleeping, so insomnia, actual panic attacks,
Wow.
a really strong sense of impending doom, like something terrible is about to happen, a powerful urge to just escape the situation, feeling detached, unreal, just feeling completely overwhelmed by the fear.
That sounds incredibly distressing. And the physical side can be intense too.
Oh, absolutely. Very physical symptoms, shortness of breath, sweating, shaking, or trembling, sometimes crying or literally running away from deep water.
Yikes.
Nausea, dizziness, maybe rapid breathing, even screaming or shouting sometimes when they see the sea. It's a whole body reaction.
So how does this get formally diagnosed? Are there specific criteria, like in the DSM?
Yes, the DSM-5, the main diagnostic manual, has criteria for specific phobias, including thalassophobia.
Okay, what are they generally?
Generally, it involves showing a persistent fear that's excessive or unreasonable about deep water. Having that fear reaction pretty much every time you're exposed. Either actively avoiding deep water situations or having to endure them with intense anxiety. The fear has to significantly interfere with your daily life, your job, your relationships, and, as we said before, it needs to have been present for 6 months or more.
Got it. And do we know how common this is?
That's tricky. Like a lot of specific phobias, the exact prevalence isn't well documented. Researchers think the severity and how common it is probably varies a lot. And many people with milder forms might not even realize it's a thing, you know? They might just think they don't like the ocean and not seek help.
Okay, let's quickly revisit that distinction we made early on, just to be crystal clear for everyone listening. Thalassophobia versus aquaphobia, one last time.
Sure, aquaphobia. Broader fear, panic related to water in almost any form. Could be a pool, a bath, rain.
Right, general water fear.
It's thalassophobia, specifically about the vastness, the depth, the unknown contents, real or imagined, of deep water. Oceans, seas, large lakes.
And you mentioned aquaphobia might often stem from a bad event.
It often can, yeah. A specific negative experience, thalassophobia feels maybe more tied to the subconscious, that deeper anxiety about the unknown, the immense. It's a subtle but important difference.
That clarifies it perfectly. Okay,
No.
so the big question, if someone recognizes these symptoms, what can be done? What are the treatments?
Well, first off, it's really vital to know that thalassophobia is treatable. And getting treatment is important because, left untreated, it can sometimes snowball into other issues.
Not quite.
PTSD, sometimes generalized anxiety, depression, other panic disorders, so addressing it is key. And there are good evidence-based therapies out there.
Like cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. We hear about that a lot for anxiety. How does it work here?
CBT is super helpful. It works by helping you identify those really disturbing, fearful thought patterns you have about deep water, and then challenging them, changing them into more positive, more realistic ways of thinking and behaving. The aim is to kind of rewire those automatic negative emotional responses.
Rewire the brain, almost.
In a way, yes. Studies even show successful CBT can actually change brain activity patterns when someone is exposed to their fear trigger later on. Pretty cool.
That is cool. Okay.
Yeah.
What about systematic desensitization? That sounds gentler.
It's definitely more gradual. Systematic desensitization involves slow, step-by-step exposure to things that trigger the anxiety.
Okay.
But, and this is key, you do it while actively using relaxation techniques you've learned. The whole point is to tackle the avoidance behavior and help you see the situation more realistically, less dangerously.
How does that actually work? What are the steps?
Usually 3 main steps. First, you learn relaxation skills, deep breathing, muscle relaxation, maybe meditation or mindfulness, things to calm your body down.
Okay.
Second, you work with a therapist to build a fear hierarchy. Basically, a list of deep water scenarios ranked from least scary to most terrifying for you.
Like maybe looking at a photo first, then a video, then going to the beach.
Exactly like that. Then, third step, you start working through that hierarchy, lowest level first, using your relaxation skills the whole time. The goal is to replace the fear response with calm, step by step. Classical conditioning, essentially.
Makes sense. Very structured. Now, our sources also mentioned exposure therapy more broadly. Is that different?
Exposure therapy is kind of the umbrella term. Systematic desensitization is one type, but exposure therapy generally is about safe, repeated contact with the phobia trigger.
To prove it's not so bad.
Pretty much. To learn that the feared thing isn't as dangerous as you thought, and to build confidence that you can handle it without freaking out.
And there are different kind of exposure mentioned?
Yes, several flavors. There's in vivo exposure that's direct, real-life confrontation, like actually getting in the water.
That sounds intense.
It can be, yeah. Dropout rates can sometimes be higher with that one. Then there's interoceptive exposure.
How's that?
That's where the therapist helps you deliberately bring on some of the physical sensations of anxiety, maybe by showing intense sea imagery so you can learn to manage those sensations in a safe space.
Oh, okay.
There's also virtual reality exposure now, using VR headsets. Really useful when real-life exposure isn't practical.
Cool tech.
And finally, imaginal exposure, where you vividly imagine the feared situation. That can be good if the phobia is linked to a past trauma.
So lots of tools in the therapy toolbox. What about medication? Does that play a role?
Meds don't cure the phobia itself, but they can definitely help manage the symptoms, especially the anxiety and fear.
Like what kind of meds?
Sometimes SSRIs, which are antidepressants, can help reduce overall anxiety. Beta blockers can be used situationally to block adrenaline's physical effects, like a racing heart.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are benzodiazepines like Valium or Xanax. They're fast-acting anti-anxiety meds, but doctors are usually pretty cautious with them.
Why is that?
Because they can be sedating and there's a risk of dependence or addiction, so they're generally used more short-term or if other things haven't worked well enough.
Okay, so it sounds like therapy CBT, exposure techniques is the main treatment, but meds might help manage symptoms along the way.
That's a great summary. Yeah, therapy is usually the core approach, sometimes supported by medication, to take the edge off the anxiety while the therapy work is happening. The main takeaway is that help is available and people can get better.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive, let's just quickly hit the main points again. Thalassophobia, it's way more than just not liking the beach, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's this deep, often really disruptive anxiety, specifically tied to the vastness, the depth, the unknown of big bodies of water.
And its origins seem complex, maybe evolution, definitely culture and stories, personal experiences, maybe even our own psychology and genetics playing a part.
Exactly. It seems to come from a mix of places.
But the crucial thing for anyone listening who feels this resonates is that even though the fear can feel huge, it is a recognized condition.
Right. And there are effective treatments, CBT, various types of exposure therapy, sometimes medication support that can really make a difference.
So maybe a final thought for our listeners. Think about that power of the vast unknown. The ocean depths are one example, but where else does it show up?
That's a great question.
What other uncharted territories out there in the world, or even inside our own heads, trigger those similar feelings of, well, fear, but also maybe curiosity? What does our reaction to the unknown tell us about being human?